Hi, we are on a brink of a good evening and a good afternoon, so I welcome you back for yet another session. Thank you for joining us all through these sessions at AISS, and we are going to have another interesting session lined up for you on a theme which is clamping down on ransom payments, the policy actions and proposals. And to have an elaborate discussion on this particular theme, we have an elite panel with us today. I will be inviting on the stage Nishant Ranjan. He's the Business Development Manager, APAC with Group IB. Nishant,
Hello,
welcome to the
everyone.
stage. Thank you
Thanks,
for joining
Sukhdev.
us. Yes. Next, I would like to invite Amol Petale. He's the Managing Director of Ankura Consulting Group, India. Welcome, Amol. Thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us today.
Great.
Now, I would like to invite our moderator for the day, Ramchandra Kulkarni. He's the Managing Director, Technology Risk at Goldman Sachs. Thank you, Ram, for joining us. Okay, I think there's some little bit of technical snags of the online mode that is happening right now, so we'll just give it a minute. I believe Ram will be joining us. We'll also have in the panel with us Mr. KM Reddy, who's the head and CISO with Union Bank of India, and last but not least, Mr. Narendranath. He's the Joint Secretary NCSC, Government of India, and we will be welcoming him onto this panel very soon. He's just wrapping up something and joining us. So we'll just wait for Ram to join in and then we'll get started with the session. In the meantime, what I would urge each and everyone in the audience is to make use of this opportunity to kind of have your thoughts placed with the speakers. There is a chat option and a Q&A option made available as part of this platform. Please make use of that and send across your questions and your suggestions on this particular theme. Needless to say that this platform also provides you an opportunity to engage with your industry peers. So you can use the networking tab on the top of this page once this session is over and we head for a break. You can use that to kind of engage with the other industry peers who are there joining us at various other sessions that are happening in parallel. So Amol and Nishant, till we get Ram and Mr. Reddy on the panel. Yes, yes, he's here. So okay, now I lost you again. I guess there is something with the internet today, or I guess we are all saving our bandwidth for the biggest thing in the evening, which used to be the highlight reel for AISS always, which
Mhm.
is the Excellence Awards.
I hope it is not the ransomware.
Definitely not for us, I'm sure. At least we didn't get any input of any kind of ransom that needs to be shipped. And even if it happens that way, trust me, we are not going to pay because I always believe that the more we pay, the more we kind of let this industry grow. It has grown to $14 billion industry because of the fear and the, I would say, some kind of a brand fear, more certainly, that causes this. So, but we should all refrain from even paying up and look at keeping our backups healthy always. That even if somebody someday attacks us, we have something to fall back on.
True. But I hope that
And
we
let's not
don't
give them any food material of any kind ever.
and ensure that you don't make the same mistake what Re-Evil Ransom group did, right? Their backup was also infected.
So that is a part of thing. But yes, these are the learnings. So the good part is that whenever we are having these conversations, so as part of DSCI, we have these conversations with our members, and a lot of members are joining us today in the
Mhm.
audience. We have always talked about these things. That end of the day, it is about how secure we keep our perimeter, and at the same time, how much we are prepared for anticipation while anticipating that there will be an attack which may be successful because we are end of the day all human,
Yeah.
and and
Absolutely.
there would be an element. So once that part is taken care of, I think things will fall in its place, and every organization will be strong enough to withstand any of these.
True. I think, yeah. Yeah, Mol, you want to say something?
No, I was just echoing what Sugrit was saying, right? It's all boiled down to sometimes people make a mistake of investing too much into technology, but they ignore the part of people and processes. So it's always a combination of all these three things. Having a technology is obviously obviously one of the solutions, but having your people trained and in the position of knowledge, that always helps in such cases, right? Because in a typical scenario, the way ransomware or malware enters your organization is through the weakest link, human. So if your staff is trained how to handle what should they not click on, or what
Hmm.
they should not fall prey of, I think half the battle is won over there.
Correct. Very true. Very true. And I believe, in the interest of time and everyone who's joining us here today, we should actually start with this discussion on the evolution piece itself, that how it actually got started and how it has shaped up thereafter. And then probably we'll head to Amol and Nishant on how have the threats in the domain evolved over the last few years in terms of scales, the sponsorship piece, the sophistication, and the technical advancements that are happening. And needless to say that the antisocial side is much more fast at accepting transformation. They are evolving at a pace which is making the good side actually make a run for its money, and actually making life difficult with sleepless nights for all the leaders in the security space. So and I see Mr. Narendranath also joining us. Thank you, Mr.
Sorry.
Narendranath, for joining us here.
Can you hear?
So
Sorry,
we had a little bit of a hiccup with the technical piece where Ram is facing some challenge, probably because of the bandwidth.
okay.
So he's going to join us very soon, I believe. And just to take the conversation forward, I would now let.
Yeah, actually, I think I should start with an apology, which normally is not the ideal thing to do. I was I was in another meeting and I was really desperately trying to close this meeting and come here, but then I did a very hard stop and left the others to fend for themselves and came here. So sorry
Thank you
for
so
that.
much.
Yeah, yeah.
No, no, we thank you. It's, one person's loss is the other person's gain. So we thank you for giving that time to us.
Okay, thank you. Actually, it's a
So,
pleasure to
so
be
we'll,
here.
we'll start this session as an open house where we were thinking that we will be discussing on the evolution of ransomware to start
Yeah.
with, and
Okay.
then go down the lane where we see, because we have Amol and Nishant joining us
Yeah, yeah.
from the sectors where they are actually watching it very closely,
Okay.
and supporting various user orgs. So
Okay.
we can look at understanding how this evolves. So I
Yeah, yeah.
can see Ram joining in. Ram, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm there. Sorry.
Awesome. So I've taken the first part and I've put the question into open panel. So over to you
Sure.
from here on to take it forward. But I will be backstage and I will be very attentive in hearing from each one of you. So thank you
Thank
for
you.
joining us. Over to you
Thank you.
guys.
Thank you, Sugrit.
Yeah, so I believe we have started with the evolution part. So maybe I'll give an initial commentary and then let our other colleagues also give their perspective. I mean, from a pure evolution, this all started, what, 5, 6 years back, where we had somebody encrypting a file and then asking a particular ransom to unlock that file. That was like 5, 6 years back. And then what really changed in terms of scale, in terms of just sheer impact and magnitude of this threat is in 2017 when WannaCry happened. Like we had what, 200,000 machines across the world being affected and causing millions of dollars in damages. And also in terms of sheer spread, it spread to about 150 countries. And that is where I think a lot of organizations changed their outlook in terms of this wasn't really a small nuisance value, but a big threat that needed to be addressed. And then in the same year, in 2017, we had one of the slight variations of that in terms of NotPetya, where we had a destructive attack on financial systems, banks, energy firms, and that impacted a few countries, including Denmark, to some extent India and US. And then when we go on around 2019, that is when the evolution took the next stage, where we looked at uh, the criminal gangs and sophisticated gangs entering into the arena. And then there were a couple of things that we noticed. One was organizations had improved their data recovery process. So there wasn't any need to pay the criminals to unlock the data, and attackers wanted to maximize their revenue. So what they found was exposing sensitive data is more destructive to organization reputation, especially if you are in the firm in e-commerce, insurance space, hospitality space, than simply just encrypting that. That was in 2019. And obviously this year we saw earlier in the year couple of pretty big attacks in terms of colonial pipeline. So this year has been all about critical infrastructure, supply chains, and energy companies. And we had two of the biggest incidents in this space in this year, where we had colonial pipeline, which really affected the U.S. Fuel distribution channel pretty hard. And then obviously there was a Kaseya suffered a ransomware attack which ended up impacting more than 1,000 organizations. So obviously there was a cyber criminal outfit which claimed the responsibility. So what was a simple file encrypt and decrypt, you give me money, about 6-7 years, has now become a pretty sophisticated way of looking at things. And I'll let Nishant add to it. Nishant and Amol add to this as well.
Thanks, Ram, and I think you really highlighted some of the facts around how a simple problem became a big nuisance for almost everyone. And I strongly believe that the way the technology evolution happened in the IT world, the cyber criminals also started using many of the different means and methods to ensure where it has reached today. And almost every organizations, to that matter, today the way we track the ransomware groups using what is called DLS, the data leak sites, the growth of the number of data leak sites itself shows the volume that has increased, and every day more than 100 different organizations data is being published, being uploaded into those data leak sites, to make it even more public, for the people to know. And you use the word, Sukrit was using a word around the majority of customers today pay ransom because of the brand damage that they fear, the fear of the brand damage, and then the loss of customer trust with this type of attacks. So yep, it's a really interesting, and I have few more points to share, but I'll let Amol first, share additional things, and I'll come back.
Thanks, Nishan. Thanks, Ram. So, absolutely taking a cue from what both of you have just mentioned, the threat has definitely evolved, and I look at this as a twofold problem, right? One is in terms of sheer attack surface and the threat landscape, because on one hand, the dependency on the online business, internet, everything has gone up. Internet of things are, I mean, one of the common things, e-commerce sites, so that attack surface itself has evolved. But on the other hand, as you rightly said, as the technology has evolved on one side, the threat actors also have been able to cope up with it. In fact, they are way ahead than that. In terms of scale, if you see sheer scale, I mean, there are various forums available when the numbers are put, comparative numbers from last few years. But in one of the reports I recently read, that only from 2020 to 2021, the number of attacks have gone more than 100% in terms of ransomware. In terms of money, I think Sukrit just mentioned that it's already $1 billion market. In terms of technology, we briefly touched upon it, but overall the attacks in terms of use of technology, which the threat actors are using, has also gone up, making it difficult for companies like us, consulting companies, or who are into digital forensics, decode and decrypt these ransomware, making it more and more difficult, encrypting the backups also. And more than that, I think one of the major evolution is in terms of sophistication. Earlier, when it started, everything was like a indiscriminate and kind of not so focused kind of attack. But however, if you see it right now, in my experience, what has happened is it has turned into what we call big game hunting, wherein the attacks are more targeted. The attacks are targeted towards the organizations who are less tolerant to the downtimes, like say healthcare or government organization. These organizations are targeted the most. Um, there is a term called double extortion, wherein one is obviously asking for the ransom when the threat actor encrypts your file. On the other hand, they also threaten you that your data will be put on the in the public domain, and it will be sold on dark web, right? And one of the most important other aspect is franchising this whole industry, right? So there are services like crime as a service or ransomware as a service, wherein you hire these threat actors. Some people hire these threat actors who can who can launch targeted attacks in terms of developing, marketing, selling, maintaining, and even negotiating the ransom. So entire service is kind of franchise. So that's the way I see it. Over
Thanks,
to you.
Amol. And just to
Right.
add, yeah, sorry, Ram. So just to add, so we within Group IB very diligently follow these crime actors, the cyber criminals, and then we have been doing this for quite a long time. And as you said, there has been many sophisticated techniques used, and from being ransom as a service, which was pretty prevalent last year, this year, what we noticed was that the RAS has converted into a more of a distributed service environment with affiliate groups like access broker groups, many different affiliate programs, and extortion or and ransom collection programs, and also there, I said correctly, there are uh, huge distribution of the responsibility that has happened across the cyber criminal groups, and
Yeah.
that itself is making very difficult for anyone who thinks that there is a silver bullet to protecting against ransomware is not correct. And unless you understand this evolution, unless you understand this sophistication, ransom payments is here to stay. But let's see with some of the actions from a policy, from the technology controls, from the other proposals that we can hear. Will I hope all the audience will be benefited from that. Over to you, Ram.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Amol and Nishant. I guess there is a lot to talk in terms of evolution, in terms of sophistication, but I do understand there are a couple of other sessions which are part of this summit. So we will leave the evolution part at this moment as part of this session there, and then probably go to the next stage in terms of how do we look at preparedness, how do we look at fighting these attacks. Uh, and when we look at this space, the corporate sector has their preparedness at like various degrees of maturity at this moment. Some are done a lot of excellent work, some are still struggling. But in terms of Mr. Nath, I would come to you. In terms of the government, how is it the government looking at this threat and then establishing some basic principles, some basic framework for all the government institutions to follow, and maybe as a guidance to corporations to follow as well?
Okay, thank you very much. I was listening very keenly to the deliberations that were going along on the current state and what is actually developed over the period of time regarding the ransomware. One thing that comes to mind is that ransomware is one manifestation of an infection. I mean, somebody has got access to the system, they were exploiting it in a particular way, and now they are exploiting in another particular way. That's all. It was they were, for example, exfiltrating data or for espionage purposes, and the ransomware is one manifestation of how to exploit what the entry that have gone to the system. The vectors of infection are similar to what they were earlier. It's not that we have got some new vectors of infection. If you have a phishing attack or social engineering that is used for getting into the system, after that, whether you encrypt it and then demand a ransom, or you exfiltrate the data and then threaten somebody that I'm going to make the data public and then extract a ransom, is a point of point of interest now. So having said that, because the economic value that these syndicates, or as you have rightly, as the point speakers have pointed out, that the enterprises now that have cropped up for doing this activity, they see a good business case for doing all of this activity. And there's a lot of especially now, there've been cases where small enterprises have been impacted and individual companies have been impacted. But the governments of across the world have really woken up to the problem of ransomware, when critical infrastructure also started getting impacted. And some of the cases have been quoted, like like the colonial pipeline case that they talked about, or even the food. JBS food was also, you could take as a critical infrastructure because it was the food supply was being controlled through that. So that is when the governments have woken up. And you know there are measures that there's a lot of thinking that's going on about what's required to be done. And not only that, there's a lot of international collaborative efforts that have manifested now in trying to see that how do we cooperate in that. And and if you look at it, there are different dimensions to this. One is the cyber hygiene part of it is very important part. How do you promote cyber hygiene so that people don't get infected is one part. The other is how do you build and in that, you'll have, when you have cyber hygiene, I think there's capacity building that also goes into it, for people to understand how they handle systems. So the capacity building so that people don't get infected is one part. The capacity building about how do they build resilient systems and manage them so that even if they do get infected, and how do they restore the systems is one. So how do they configure the systems, how do they manage the systems so that even the backups don't get infected again. So that is another part. So the capacity building part of it is that. The other is in all of this is to have some guidance documents, maybe some tabletop exercises, maybe. So these are all and maybe some baselines that are required. So these are all things that are there. Institutional mechanisms exist, like we have the certain, would actually you would find that proactively looks at the cyberspace and starts giving advisories for people and warning them in advance about the measures to be taken for ransomware. So I would actually there are lots more to you can talk about it, but I think we will talk about it as we go ahead. But uh, suffice it to say now is that the government is really exercised about the spurt in ransomware attacks that is happening, and and also working on mechanisms to see that how do we prevent them and mitigate them, and also take corrective actions. So these are all the different dimensions on which work is happening. And as we go ahead, I think I'll go into depth, much more depth as we go ahead.
Sure, great. Thank you for your views on that. I mean, just staying on the preparedness part of it, just from a sectorial point of view, financial services is pretty high in terms of priority. And from a bank perspective, Mr. Reddy, how do you see the ransomware threat, and more importantly, how banks are looking at establishing a framework to kind of detect, respond, report the full life cycle of how do we manage these threats? What has been your experience, and what has been your work you've done in your organization at this moment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ram. It's really great concern for the banks today, because banks are holding not only the money, and today the critical component is the customer PII, and they are having the payment data as well as the transaction data. So, and it also categorized in one of the essential service, and the ransomware, it is very strategic, it is very sophisticated, and it is a transnational also. So looking at the grave of the kind of attacks it is happening. So I mean, they are quite targeting to the essential service sector, like our sir has said earlier, that food sector, in the gas, and like water treatment plant. That means it is not only the hazardous to the organization, it also hazardous to the human life. They can finish the human life by exercising such. So it is very much scary, and very much I mean, threatful to entire globe as such. So it is a global crisis now, and it is evolving very fast. It is coming with the new form of kind of actions, tactics, process, and procedures and all. So as a bank, see, now bank is now accelerating the digital transformation. So we are on the digital transformation today, and we are also doing a lot of payment innovations are going on. So this, all these things, whatever happening now, that there is a great opportunity for this the hackers to do in a greater level. So that's why the preparedness is most important. So for banks, today we are following very robust cyber resilient framework. It involves around the people, process, and technology. So if you look at the banking sector now in terms of technology to safeguard such type of attacks, so I think every bank has adopted the multi-layer, the defense in depth architecture. So the architecture is going to help you to catch the proactively or predictively, and it is moving. From what they are investing a lot of money. So broadly, if I want to tell you, okay, how our preparedness is about from the bank side, I categorized into 7C. That means the first C, it require your continuous surveillance is required. You should have a very next generation security operation center, or you should have a smart security operation center. No more the traditional security center which works with one tool or two tool is not going to help. So there should be a AI/ML based tools should be used. The security automation should happen, and so that you can predict what kind of threat and what kind of the initial indication of the ransomware can be detected at the early stage. So next, the second C is the collaborative threat intel sharing platforms, because banks have to work now with the industry, academia, global partners, and with the government of India and all the stakeholders. We have to collaboratively share our information with them, what is happening, what kind of IOCs we are seeing, what kind of threats we are seeing, is it really impacting to the critical infrastructure or not. Next, we should have a cyber defense center. Rather I said that the kind of threat surface it is increasing due to this digital disruption. I think the cyber defense center, where you have to collaborate the fusion of all your threat intel information, your deceptive technologies, your external threats, inside threat, and it evolves like a very robust cyber defense center is required now, which will give you kind of very predictable kind of monitoring, and quick detection will happen. And the fourth C is that you have to comply to the supervisory reporting framework, because every cyber security incident whatever evolve coming in your critical infrastructure, you should able to report, you should able to invest, you should able to detect, you should able to investigate, and you should able to respond immediately. That is another critical component. And the fifth C is that you have to constitute one of the quick incident response team, because this incident response team, which is capable of doing the analysis that what kind of severity of the kind of threat, and how is it going to what is it going to take some data from you, or what kind of actions are happening inside your network. That quick incident response team can analyze and take necessary action. Then the sixth C is that necessarily a organization should have a cyber insurance policy in hand, so that even if it got attacked or something, whatever financial losses you are making out, maybe you can compensate by taking the cyber insurance. But last but not least, the seventh point is very important. That is the cyber security culture, the awareness in every level. All the stakeholders should get the right education about such kind of threats, so that it can be mitigated at the early stage. So these are the my thought process, where a bigger organization should look at it, so that if you are well prepared, definitely you will win such kind of threats very quickly. Over to you.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Reddy, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, when we look at preparation, it's it's uh, uh, it's such a thing that if you do your basics right in terms of your basic hygiene of an information security program, basic hygiene in terms of cyber, in various aspects of information security, that would address most part of it. So it's not like a different thing that we need to do or we need to look at. So thank you very much for your perspective. The next section that what we probably want to discuss a bit is on policy framework, what is happening globally, and potentially what are the things which are being considered maybe in India as well. So, I mean, we'll begin with an initial commentary around what is happening in this policy space in select geographies. And Nishant, why don't you provide us a bit of perspective on that in terms of what is happening? And obviously, I can add as well.
Sure, Ram. Thanks for that. And I'm working very closely in the APAC region, so I'll take two specific examples where I've seen proactive policies and acts, I would say, from the government side. First, being in Singapore itself, Singapore government has been quite proactive. I would say second to GDPR, if I have to put it like that, using the PDPA Act, which is Personal Data Privacy Act, essentially to govern any kind of cyber crime which leads to exposure of the personal information of the citizens, and a policy framework around that, and making it as an act to the point that the cybersecurity agency, which is there in Singapore, and the head of CSA has been given as a similar power of a commissioner, and to the point that not only they are monitoring and they are advising different corporates and organizations to uh, create and manage a specific set of guidelines and security controls to protect their infrastructure assets and personal information, but also if they see that any organization is failing to do so, they can penalize that organization. The penalty is all the way up to Singapore $1 million, which is equivalent of around 740k of US dollars. So this is one example of Singapore government. Similarly, I've seen in Australia, Australian government also putting a lot of effort, bringing many different forms of legislations. Unlike Singapore, which is a smaller country, is much faster to enforce a legislation. A country like Australia, which is similar to in terms of India as well, every state also has got their own jurisdiction and power, but there has been a very concentrated effort to again not only create a stronger guideline and enforcement of that guideline around top 5 and top 20 best practices around cybersecurity, where the patch management is one of the first in that, but also making it more specific around the large scale data breach. Ransomware is one of the part of that, as Narendra sir earlier talked about, is a new way of monetizing that cyber criminal activity. And OAIC, which is another agency in Australian government in Canberra, which looks after many of these legislation, they have also been bringing a newer and newer way. One of the recent one that they got was the notification, essential notification of any such data breach that any organizations are facing, and if they fail to disclose, there will be additional penalties for those organizations. So these are my points and experience that I've seen from the governments. I hope similarly with the GDPR, European Union has been very proactive in enforcing organizations to take much stringent actions on the policy as well as the technology controls that they can do. Ram, over to you if some additional
Yeah,
points.
thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you, Nishant. So I would only add what's pretty interesting bill which has come out just maybe 3 or 4 weeks back in the US. It's called as, I mean, probably more, some of you may be aware anyway, the Ransomware and Financial Stability Act. This was introduced like 3 or 4 weeks back, early November, and it's still being debated. Some pretty interesting provisions there as well, in terms of any organizations are required to kind of notify the Treasury Department director, basically on all, it comes under all financial crimes. So FinCEN director should be notified. That is one of the asks of this particular bill. And then it also looks at confidentiality of all the reporting done as part of ransomware. So the disclosure obligation for the company in terms of quarterly disclosure, that is not there. So they have been exempted from that, so that the companies can do the disclosure to the straight to the Treasury Department Financial Crimes Office, and that will be kept confidential. And any ransomware payment which is like greater than 100,000 in response to such attacks, the financial institutions should actually ask for a ransomware payment authorization. So that's pretty interesting as well. And if the payment has been made eventually, within 2 business days, they have to indicate back to the treasury saying that if they have done yes or no. So that's a pretty interesting bill. What is also happening, and pretty recently in September, the Foreign Assets Control Office in the US also uh, published a new advisory which talks about a couple of important things. It talks about many things, but a couple of important things in terms of if the companies are paying ransom without proper protocol, as was discussed just now, they may also lead to sanctions on those companies. So that's something, that's a provision which is being still debated. And second is facilitating any ransomware payments on behalf of a victim is also now considered a violation by the Foreign Assets Office. So pretty interesting developments, both in the West as well as in the East, as well as Australia, as Nishant said. So given all that background, I mean, this question is to Mr. Nath. From an India perspective, are we looking at any specific framework, specific policy around ransomware, similar to what we described in terms of Australia, US, and all of these have happened in the last 2-3 months only? And second part of my question is also around how we look at potential reference point to a couple of important laws that are in progress, the data protection law as well as the national cyber security strategy. So how is kind of India looking at this from a policy point of view?
Okay. So one of the things about India is, and I've in various forums where I speak, I talk about is that there's the level of maturity across the different sectors, is different in India. It's not that, like, for example, from where Mr. Reddy is coming from, the level of maturity is very high. The amount of cyber security they have, and they've got a very mature regulator also, like the RBI. And if you look at the telecom sector also, it's a technology backed sector. So there also you'll find that they've been working on security for a pretty long time. And they've evolved over a period of time, and the level of maturity is high. But you cannot say the same of all the other sectors. So whatever you've talked about that Australia is doing, and in terms of penalties, or the Singapore, you talked of penalties and all, or some mandates regarding reporting, you'll find that there are, sectorally, you'll find where the maturity level is high, you'll find that there are mandates for reporting of breaches. So that mandate already exists. There are mandates regarding maintenance of logs. There are mandates for maintaining due diligence for cybersecurity practices, audits,
Agree.
train manpower manning. All of these are there. Okay, and there are penal provisions also. I'm not very aware of Mr. Reddy might have it, but I come from a telecom background. I know that for each breach that you have in the telecom sector, the penalty is 50 crore rupees for each breach. So they are hefty penalties. So that's what we do already have frameworks, but I'll say that it is not across all sectors. Now, for example, the power sector, you find that the last 6 months or 7 months, there's a lot of activity there, and you can be really proud of the type of work that's going on in terms of getting the documentary framework in place, so that people have guidelines and policies in place for the power sector entities to take measures and for them to monitor that. So having said that, it makes a case that we should have a uniform requirement across all the sectors in the country, and that is an accepted thing. And this is where this we have provisions in the IT Act for reporting of breaches. It's not that it's not there; it is there.
Correct.
Yeah, the provisions are there. But are the penal provisions? Yes, the certain could actually go and then go after them and then give a notice and then take action. Though it's not given that what is the amount of penalty and all. The cybersecurity strategy, which you have talked about, is the one exercise that we thought that we should take, because the policy had come in 2013. It's been considerable amount of time, and the cybersecurity strategy is one that took a holistic view. It stepped back, and then looked at what's happening now. What is that we wish to have, and then it took a holistic view, and the ransomware or the infections and the type of measures that we've taken is all covered in the cybersecurity strategy that we have. So that is one measure that's happening. And as you said, the protection of the data and the privacy bill that we are talking about, that is also an important legislative piece that we are looking forward for it to come. So it will actually cover, and that is, these are two things that are not sectoral, that they cover the complete whole of country approach. Both of them take a whole of country approach, and once they're put in place, you will find that you'll have a good legislative and regulatory framework that will be there in place.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that
Thank you.
then
Thank you.
no, I'm not finished. Sorry. So one of the things, because of this ransomware attacks that are there, this it's that we are looking at, like for example, certain also, and we look at the command and control servers that are there, and we try to do an attribution, and then just all debate of whether you go in for a takedown or prosecution. All of these measures are there, and I don't know if you're all aware that India has recently joined the counter ransomware initiative. I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but there's a counter ransomware initiative, and there's a 100 days program under that. India is part of this, and it's a coalition of countries that are interested in taking positive action, under this initiative. And they are where we're looking at law enforcement, we're looking at financial, regulatory, and
Absolutely.
diplomatic initiatives that should come under this. Okay, so that is, and as we go ahead, if you have time, I would dwell a little more into these activities, because when you talk of ransomware, one is the technical measures that you have to put in place. The other is diplomatic cooperation among all the countries. The third aspect is the financial. Once the ransom is paid, where does the money flow? Who are the people? Who are the actors? How do you go after them? How do you prosecute them? And how do you take them down? These are also some requirements that are there, and I think some thought has to go into that. So these are some of the things that are happening. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, you actually answered half of my next question as well, in terms of how do we do the capability building in terms of our law enforcement, or I mean, any legal framework, etc. So, Amol, do you want to add anything that Mr. Nath provided his perspective? Do you want I want to add anything else?
Thanks, Ram. And Mr. Nath made very important points, which I would like to expand a bit upon those. Right, when he talked about the maturity of the organizations in certain sector, absolutely the enablement is something that we should look at in all the other sectors. Important thing as a policy, we should make the people also aware that when they pay the ransom, they are actually in a way increasing the resources of the threat actors. So as a policy, that awareness also should be imparted to the other sectors, that they should not be encouraging any such payments. In terms of designing the policies, and he already touched upon aggressively going after the threat actors, having an international collaboration, aggressively having this counter operations or offensive cyber operations to take these threat actors down continuously. And it's going to be a continuous effort, right, when we move in that direction, because they are going to continuously evolve, and the law enforcement agencies will have to go after them to make sure that we bring these threat actors down, and we are ahead of the curve always. So enablement from both the sides. One is from the agencies, the security agencies, which can bring them down. Another is from the awareness point of view, wherein the organizations absolutely prevent it from technological measures also, and from the process and people measures also. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you. I know we're at time. Probably one more point, which is probably important. And while I have you, Amol, I'll request you to provide your views in terms of how we are looking at cyber insurance and insurance policy coverage. What are the caveats and how it kind of uh, aligns to this particular space as well? What's been your view? What's been something that you are hearing in the industry? If you can keep it to a minute, that would be great.
Absolutely, Ram. I'll try and keep it to minimum. This two aspects. One is obviously the cyber insurance, and other is the step that RBI is already taking, right? That regulating the cryptocurrencies. That's one step, probably going to be in the direction of regulating the ransomware payment. But on the other hand, if you look at the cyber insurance companies, uh, typically organizations feel that they are covered when they make the ransom payments and the cyber insurance policies. Most of the cyber insurance policies cover that, but having some caveats in place, like I came across one news article which was very recent. Few insurance companies have started giving these caveats that unless and until you have bare minimum security
Control.
programs and evaluations in place, we are not going to pay for what you have already paid for, or make sure that you have a bare minimum protection in place, and after that only, if you are hit by any such incident, we will pay you, or otherwise some make an exception that you're not going to pay you. So sometimes these kind of caveats will also organizations be more vigilant. So organizations will have to keep a look at the trend, how cyber insurance companies are treating this. Over to you, Ram.
Okay, thank you, Amol. I guess we are at time, and it's the time to thank all of you, gentlemen, for providing your perspectives on this particular topic. I guess there is a lot more to talk, a lot more to cover, but obviously this is the first step. So thank you very much, and with that, we are closing this particular session.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Ram. Thank you
Thank you.
all. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you
Nanda.
all. Thank you,
Thank you.
Ram. Thank you,
Bye
Ravi
bye.
sir. Thank you. Thank you, Mal.